Okay. Hi, this is Michael Makovsky. I'm President and CEO of JINSA. Thank you very much for joining this afternoon. I'm honored to have a good friend of mine, an old friend of mine, Bob McNally. We knew each other in the Bush administration. I worked in the Pentagon. He worked in the White House. I should also say, just on a both a personal and a professional level, um, uh, Larry Goldstein, who was my mentor in the oil business. I used to be an oil analyst. Um, and I worked for Larry, my first job, and was a close friend and mentor until he passed away a little over a year ago. Was also, I think, very close to Bob and on your board or something, or advisory board, Bob. Is that
Yep.
right?
Yep.
So
It's
we
Advisor Rapidan.
Yeah, I miss him every day, and especially days like this. So we have that in common as well. But we're very fortunate to have, obviously, the energy issue and this war. The energy issue related to this war is obviously very important. So we're very lucky to have Bob. Well, and I'll explain who he is, but a leading energy analyst, an expert, and a really smart guy. Uh, Try to explain to us what how he sees things going on and where we're going. So he's the founder and president of Rapidan Energy Group, an energy consulting firm. Uh, Prior to founding Rapidan, he served, as I mentioned, as a White House energy advisor. He's an energy market analyst, and also he was a hedge fund strategist at Tudor Investment Corporation. He's the author of the acclaimed book Crude Volatility: The History and Future of Boom Bust Oil Prices, which received many awards. And I see him often in the media being quoted, and he's testified many times before Congress on energy markets and national security. Um, and then I'll just say, as I earlier mentioned, he was from 2001 to 3, he served as special assistant to the president of the White House National Economic Council and as 2003 senior director for international energy at the National Security Council. Bob, thanks very much for joining us today. So let me ask you, but I want to get, so to say, down and dirty about what's going on in the market. But before I do that, let this as a little background. Um, you kind of, as a keen observer of all this and analyst, you guys kind of saw this coming with the war in the oil market, or you want to explain just a brief background on that?
Yeah. Mike, thank you very much. It's great to be with you. I'm a big fan of yours and of JINSA's.
Thanks.
I've a couple times a year I would brief, along others. You were kind enough to invite me to brief IDF and IAF officers, and the thought that some of the young men and women that we were talking to there are now giving it to Iran is gives me enormous pride. And I'm a proud friend of Israel, and Larry Goldstein was my Jewish grandfather, and so forth. So I'm really happy to be with you here. I really appreciate it.
Thank
Yeah, my view is the United States, Israel, we're on a collision course with the Iranian regime. I didn't see the world's too small. The Middle East is too small. And after 10/7, I was convinced that it was a matter of time before there would be an ultimate showdown with this regime. And I was so convinced, that I did a big study. And Mike, you and I did this for President Bush, back in the day. When you think you're going to have a war in the Persian Gulf, and you think about energy, you want to kind of war game it and map it out. You want to say things like, well, let's look at how long Iran could choke off by far the world's most important energy artery for oil and natural gas. What are their military means to do so? What are our military means to prevent it, et cetera, et cetera. And then, Mike, you're an energy expert too. You look at, okay, well, how do the arteries in the energy system work? Where do we flow gas? Where's it produced? How can we redirect around? And so we did a massive study first in 2019, actually, when there was a lot of tanker fighting. And then we did it in June. We hired a military officer, a retired Navy captain. We call it, battle space and barrel flow, the energy market implications of a Hormuz conflict. And the long story short of that is that it would not be easy to quickly clean up the Hormuz Strait. And I want to, before getting into the nitty gritty, I think it's important if you think about the concept of a load bearing assumption, an assumption that is so deeply and widely held that to think otherwise is almost absurd and a waste of time and too shocking. So it could be something like the United States will never depeg from gold, which we did in 1971, or the Federal Reserve will never let a bank go under, Lehman Brothers 2008, or the Bank of England will not devalue the pound. Thank you, Secretary Bessent back at Soros, 1992. The Swiss will never be moved from their peg. They were. So occasionally there are these ideas that are deeply embedded. Okay. Until 9 days or so ago, if you had suggested to somebody or asked them to think about a world in which all of the maritime traffic through Hormuz was stopped by an adversary, they would tell you, and they told me, you're out of your mind. There's no way an American president would allow an adversary to do something so harmful for the global economy. You know, what the Houthis are doing at the Bab el-Mandab in the Red Sea, that's bad. But there are ways around the Bab el-Mandab. You go around Africa. No fun, but you can still run the world. You can't run the world without the Hormuz Strait working. And so it's like asking people, what happens if we woke up and the sun rose in the north and set in the south? What would that do to agriculture? You're like, you're suggesting something so absurd to me that I can't take you seriously. Well, we are now day, what is it? 9 or 10, 11 maybe, into something that was thought to be impossible. Now, on Sunday night, we had the biggest hike in oil prices ever, almost to $120 a barrel from like 80. Why? Because traders started to understand that Hormuz is not opening soon. And without 20% of our production, oil prices must rise. This is just the law of supply and demand. It's a brutal law, brutal. And it says the price will go high enough to kill 20% of your consumption because you cannot consume what you cannot produce. And we've lost 20% of production. There are inventories. We can talk about inventories and SPR. We'll get into the details. But that's the long story short. Now, then what happened? President Trump yesterday, CBS News went and said, don't worry, the war is about over. It's going to be over soon. Traders were so happy to hear that because remember, for 100 years, they thought, no, that's what I thought because this is crazy that the Iranians are stopping traffic in Hormuz. Yeah, that's over, right? Okay, good. And everything sold off. And now we're back down to 90 or so. Okay. In my view, and I don't say this with joy, just the opposite. I've checked with my friends who are military experts, who are talking to military experts, companies who have heard from military experts. I don't think we're going to open up Hormuz anytime soon. I hope we do. I hope we do. If we don't, everyone's going back to the nightmare that they thought was just impossible and they thought only lasted a day. So every day that goes by, there used to be 100+ tankers that would go through the strait. Now there's like 3 or maybe 5 or maybe 0. Now, people send me, Mike, I don't know about you, but everyone's sending me these charts that are floating around the internet of showing like the Iranian missile salvos are going down, like day 1, day 2, day 3, or the drones are going down 1, 2, 3. And they're like, look, Iran's about done. It's about done. Come on, we're going to escort ships. Okay. What we're degrading in Iran is important. It's good. It's the kind of thing that can hit Israel. But it's not the things that they need to stop traffic in Hormuz. What they need and still have is ASCMs, anti-ship cruise missiles, mobile with launchers, okay? Fast attack boats, artillery, mines. CBS report, signs of mining started. Drones, okay? And even subs, believe it or not, these little subs that are actually hard to detect and can be used for torpedoes, but also laying mines. Think about a game of whack-a-mole, except there's thousands of moles, and they're all up and down the coastline. Consider that last April, the Trump administration, the military, pummeled the Houthis for 52 days. 52 days 1,000 strikes, $1 billion we spent, and we failed. The Bab el-Mandab was still closed. Trump had to declare a ceasefire. The Houthis are inferior to Iran in their weaponry and how good their coastline is. Much longer coastline, much easier to defend. So I don't want to be Mr. Doom and Gloom here, but we have to have clear eyes. Um,
So could I, let
yeah,
me, Bob, you mind if I jump in? Let's get into some of this, and I appreciate that. I want to get back to when you say that there's only maybe a few ships getting through, you want to explain why? What I mean is it the insurance rates? Is it the fear? Is it the military threat? I mean, I understand it's connected. We've sunk what, 46, 50 ships of the Iranians,
yeah,
but that's not enough. And you mentioned the mines, which obviously,
yeah.
so why aren't ships going through? Just to explain that.
Fear, risk, and fear.
Okay.
Because those insurance companies, they're talking to the military. They know what I'm talking about here. They're looking at the ASCMs, the
Yeah.
boats, the mines, the drones.
Okay.
And this sinking of ships, Mike, that's like that was great like in World War II and things. That's a sideshow. The ships were never going to be a risk to Hormuz. It's the asymmetric, layered
Yeah.
capabilities that Iran has. That's what the insurance companies are worried about. And even if you saw the resumption of insurance, the tanker owners may not risk it. The cargo. Can you imagine a laden cargo tanker? And the Iranians hit one, a full ship of oil in the narrowest part of the strait getting hit. They won't do
The
it.
other
And
thing I
plus, the seafarers declared the area a war zone. The seafarers can say, we won't go.
I
Now,
see.
some of the state-owned oil companies may say, you go or I'll send you back to Sri Lanka. They may do that. But no. Look, what we have to see is Iran's military ability. That threatens Hormuz. Let me be very careful. That threatens Hormuz. That has to be degraded.
The insurance, is there more than one insurance company? Is it Lloyd's of London that does this? And the rates have gone up like what percent roughly, you think?
I haven't watched it. A lot of it's just canceled. There are a number of them who do it. A lot of them is canceled. I think there's one or two that may have come back, but I do see sporadic reports. I don't think we have a full market yet. That's why Trump had to step in and say, okay, the
Mm.
U.S. government's going to step in and provide this, and we're still setting that up. But I don't think we've seen much. There's certainly not a lot of liquidity if there is.
So let me ask you, so you're, okay, so if the Strait of Hormuz is virtually closed, could you also address now, there've been some reporting on this, that East-West pipeline in Saudi Arabia. I was just looking it up before us because I remember looking at it a long time ago. We were in the government. I was reading it said, I guess it's in the Wall Street Journal. It said something like the capacity or not the out not the throughput, not the capacity was something like 2.5 million barrels a day. And now that I thought the Aramco said it's twice that, but they're going to try to reach 7 million barrels a day. I guess if you could say how much you think the capacity that of that pipeline to avoiding versus how much oil in barrels a day was coming out of the Strait of
Yeah.
Hormuz.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so prior to the conflict, 15 million barrels a day of crude was flowing through Hormuz. Let's number. Now, there happen to be 5 million barrels a day of refined product like gasoline and diesel. Okay, 15 million barrels a day of crude. Um, the East-West pipeline that you described, which goes to Yanbu on the Red Sea, until recently, the maximum throughput capacity was 5 million barrels a day. However, and I believe it's true, Aramco just announced they were able to boost it to 7 million barrels a day. Larry Goldstein used to talk about this drag agents. You can
Oh yeah,
put
right.
chemicals in the oil and it flows faster. I don't understand it.
Remember,
It's chemistry of some
remember
sort.
him talking to me about that.
Yeah, yeah. So it's going from 5 to 7. But remember, what matters for replacing a part of that 15 is how much extra space there was, not the whole capacity, right? Because let's say until before the war, we think about 2 million barrels a day was already flowing through it. That would mean, right, that if you assume 5, there's only 3 extra. If we assume it went up to 7, that means there's room for 5, which is good. That means 1/3 of your 15 million barrels a day, theoretically, could be redirected through that unused capacity, which is now higher because of the drag agents, to Yanbu, and that's a good thing.
Is there other ways to get out oil in that region? For instance, for Iraq, just to use an example that we both worked on, are there ways that they could get oil out through Turkey? Or I'm just using an example.
Yeah, no, there used to be old no, I mean there's Kirkuk, but that's just been utilized, then it was down. The only other option currently available is this new pipeline, this Habshan Fujairah pipeline in the
Yeah,
UAE,
I was going to
uh,
ask about that.
about 1.5 million. But the Iranians hit the Fujairah terminals on the Gulf of Oman pretty quickly. And so I'm not sure. There's been reporting there that may have been hit. And
Uh,
it's not nearly as big as that East-West pipeline, also called the Petrol line. So,
yeah.
and that's it. So I think for crude, it's just that East-West pipeline. Now, for refined products, there's nothing. That's
Mm,
why Europe is like getting killed, especially on jet fuel. I mean, the airlines are just getting ready to
mm.
go out of business. Europe got a lot of refined product. And what's worse, LNG. Ras Laffan had to shut down, not so much because it was hit, although it was, but because they don't have anywhere to store they can't store the LNG, can't store LNG really. So when you can't ship it, you can't produce it. So they're shutting down that facility. That's 20%. There's no redirect for the LNG. A little bit for the crude.
So when the Qataris talked about this being shut down, they weren't just trying to heighten the pressure. It's for sure.
It's real.
I see
And
it.
now you're starting to see the oil fields shut down in Iraq, Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia. Look, if you can't put it on a boat and you can't store it, you got to stop producing it,
Right.
right? You can't bring it out of the ground.
How how damaging, like how long could a field roughly be shut down before?
That's a good question. We're looking into that. So it depends by field. So, right. So, as you know, those Gulf producers, the OPEC ones, they have to go up and down because they're with OPEC quotas and things. So, certain fields, you kind of cycle it up and down. You're used to that. There are other fields that you don't do that with. And the risk is that if you shut down one of your old workhorse fields, especially if you have to do it abruptly, but they saw this coming. There's a risk that getting it back up after a while could take a while. We're still looking into how much and which fields. I know the U.S. government is very concerned about that as well, so we're still looking into it. It's a valid concern.
Let me ask you another technical question about the oil that was coming out of those 15 barrels a day, a million barrels a day that were coming out. Now, was it all roughly the same quality of crude? I mean, just my recollection was when President Obama was president, we had the conflict with Libya. There was less oil disrupted, but it was because it was higher quality crude. It sort of disrupted the market in a different way.
Yeah.
How is this market for this kind of crude? Is the Saudi crude and the Emirati crude and the Iraqi crude that's not coming out, is it roughly the same kind of oil? And that, yeah,
Yeah, it is, and it tends to be of the medium to heavy sour quality.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
uh, rather than the super light, although I read today, again, going back to this East-West pipeline, it turns out the more oil can be put through the pipeline if it's lighter. So the Saudis are actually putting Arab Light
Uh,
through. Now their light is a little more medium in our API. It gets into the definitions, but basically what we lost from Iraq, from Kuwait, from Saudi Arabia, mainly were heavier sour grades that tended to go to Asia, which have sophisticated refineries that would turn them into refined products. That's mainly what's.
yeah, I'm glad you brought Asia up because that's a good way to pivot. About what percentage of that oil was going to Asia, roughly, you think?
Oh, off the top of my head, I don't know precisely. I mean, China was getting, I think 40% of their oil from there, but I would say for the crude, just about all. I mean, just about, I would say probably 75-80% had to be going to Asia. We were importing a little bit, Europe a little bit, but Europe imports more of the refined products. But off the top of my head, I have to say the vast bulk of it, 60-70% was going to Asian refineries. And all of the LNG, pretty much all the LNG was going there too.
Going there, the liquid natural gas. Now the Chinese, I know this. Look, I don't follow this like you do, of course, anymore. But the Chinese have been trying to build up reserves over the years. How does this affect? Now we also know they were buying about I think 90 something roughly close to 90% of the Iranian oil that was coming out and at a heavily discount. So this is obviously going to affect the Chinese. They were getting cheap oil. Uh, so how does this, how ready do you think the Chinese are for this, given what they've
They've got 1.2 billion barrels. They've got a lot, and they've been buying a bunch of oil and storing it for this
actually?
day.
Uh,
And we have a colleague of mine, a Chinese American, great patriot, grew up in a Chinese prison camp. You'll never find a more patriotic American than someone who grew up in a Chinese prison camp, and lives here now with his family. And he watches it for us closely, and he said they're just terrified though. It's not like they're thinking, "Hey, good thing we like the ant and the grasshopper. Good thing I stored up all the oil. I'm fine." No, no, no. They're terrified. They're screaming at Iran, saying, "Don't you dare mine the strait.
uh,
Stop fighting." They're terrified they're going to stop. They're going to have to, they'll stop loading at Karg and not be able to get their oil. Again, 40% of their oil was coming from the Persian Gulf, from Hormuz. So, yes, they have stockpiled. They're in a better situation for that, but they are not complacent at all about this and begging Iran to not mine the strait, which CBS, before we started, there's a CBS report that they've started mining the strait, and are very worried about it. So they're going to have to, and they've stopped exporting. China, Mike, had become the swing producer of refined products. They were the big exporter of gasoline, jet fuel, diesel. They shut all that down. So Asia, as we see in past crises, past Gulf Wars, Asia, the Japanese, the Koreans, the Chinese, they go into hoarding mode because they're so import dependent and their stocks are there, but they're worried about a prolonged disruption. And so they're in hoarding mode and very, very anxious.
Look, and I know the Wall Street Journal had an editorial today, which an issue I feel is doesn't get enough attention. Some obviously Larry Goldstein always talked about was the SPR, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve.
Yeah,
President Biden had almost half the reserve, not half, close. I don't know, was it 40% he brought it down or something from like a peak of almost 700 million barrels to like 450, or I can't
right.
remember. You would know. I don't know. Uh, for no particular emergency, just because he was trying to offset the inflationary pressures that he was engendering with his budgetary policies. But so I guess if a lot of this oil, most of this oil from the Hormuz was going to Asia, recognizing that oil is obviously a global market, how is this, you see this affecting the United States? And could we produce more? You know,
So, you know, we are insulated. First, let's talk about natural gas. Thank God. With natural gas,
yeah,
uh, we're having low prices. The rest of the world is seeing soaring prices. That's because when it comes to gas or LNG, it's really expensive to transport it. So you can have different prices, really different prices in different parts of the world. So thankfully, for our electricity and our industrial costs and home heating and everything, uh, gas, we're in good shape. Oil, while our economy is in a good shape because we're a largest producer, and we're an exporter, so our trade deficit, our GDP is okay. Our oil industry, all associated industries, investors in the oil industry are all doing well. The consumer is going to get gut punched. And if this continues and sticks, it'll start to negatively affect the supply side and raise inflation concerns. So we're insulated a little bit, but and we're not as vulnerable to a physical loss of supply like China or Japan or Korea or Singapore or otherwise. However, in terms of the price, it's all the same. And Mike, you know this, right? A supply disruption anywhere,
right.
it's a price hike everywhere, including here.
Uh,
And we started this thing, average gasoline prices were at 280 at the end of last year. Right now they're at I think we're now at 354, and we're heading towards $4. That's average in the country, right?
uh,
California will be way higher. And then it gets embedded, as you know, on the supply side. Diesel for the economy is more important. The gasoline's the thing the consumers see and they all freak out, but the diesel is, you know, all the ships, all the anything you buy anywhere, Whole Foods anywhere, came on a truck, and was produced and wrapped in oil and oil products, and so it's embedded. And so if these price rises stick, it creates an inflation problem. And then you hit it with the Federal Reserve, having to worry about inflation. It's the last thing they need. If they think it's temporary, they'll look through it. But if we think these prices are going to stick and rise, you can't. And then while we are insulated on the gas side, natural gas, and our GDP, our economy is fairly well protected because we export and we produce a lot. Consumers are still vulnerable.
Okay. By the way, I mean, before we talk about where we're going and how this affects things, am I not asking you something that I should about the, you know, fundamentals of the market right now?
Well,
Like,
people say, what about an SPR release? You mentioned the
oh, I was going
SPR.
to ask about that. Yes.
Okay, yeah, there's that. And then what can the administration do? Is there anything that can be done here to alleviate the costs and so forth? And as you know, Mike, you've been through this fire drill before, so have I. We've all, anyone who's worked, for the administration during energy crisis, there's like the laundry list of things to do. And those policy options range from marginal to purely symbolic to really stupid and counterproductive. And part of your job as a policymaker is to hope that they choose the marginal and symbolic and not go for the really stupid. And let's go through those. Um, Marginal would be an SPR release. And Trump's opposed to that. This administration, like our old boss, Dick Cheney, very opposed to using the SPR. I understand. And so the Japanese, the Europeans want to go, but let's just do some quick math. Remember, we talked, there's 15 million barrels a day of crude going through Hormuz. Maybe five of that can be redirected. So let's say there's 10. The SPR, if we do it with the Europeans, the Japanese, we all do it together, 2 million barrels a day, right? Typically, the United States draws by one, the rest draw by one. 1 + 1 is 2. So it's still a fraction. You're not solving the Hormuz math problem. It's better than nothing, but it's marginal. There are good ideas like easing the Jones Act, which prohibits the transport from a U.S. port to a U.S. port on anything but a U.S. built and crewed vessel, on which there's not a lot of them. And so basically, you can't buy, New England has to buy gasoline from Europe and can't buy it from Texas because there's not enough ships to economically bring it to Texas, kind of thing, when that pipeline is full. So easing that act is very controversial because the shipbuilders union goes crazy, but it's something you can do. Then there are little things like you can ease environmental regulations on gasoline, read vapor pressure. Mike, you're familiar with all these, but these things are minor. They're minor, um, and to some degree symbolic. There are bad ideas circulating. One is to restrict exports.
Yeah.
Really bad. Doesn't work. Won't work for very long, maybe a few days, a week or so, and then we destroy investment in the oil sector. We'll lose trust and credibility if we do that. Another one, you've seen these reports, and some of the administration officials have said, Mike, and I know you're an old futures guy, maybe the Department of Energy should get in there and start, Treasury start trading futures. There was a rumor going around this morning that Treasury was selling WTI swaps, was basically betting that WTI crude oil prices would go down. We had to shoot that down. That wasn't true. But they're considering it. Really dumb, in my view. But you can't underestimate the panic of an elected official, a president, when they're faced with those rising energy prices, especially the biggest disruption. The only thing that's ever worked in the past is you call up Saudi Arabia and you say, can you please produce more oil? And if they do, but now that won't work because Saudi Arabia is blocked.
Right. It's like, right. It doesn't matter. It's like, with the missiles that were hitting in Iran, it's the launchers that matter the most because that you have to deliver those things. It's the same with the oil. So you
Right.
don't see the SPR, if there's a G7 release, like there was a rumor yesterday that seemed to help, or I don't know, rumor report, I should say,
Yeah.
seemed to, you don't think that will have much of an impact.
No, unfortunately, no.
Yeah. So,
Nope. Nothing will solve this but restarting the free flow of ships through Hormuz. It's the only solution that stops this.
yeah. Let me ask you, you know, going ahead, um, I just want to, I know it hasn't been discussed a lot, but let's say for the sake of argument, the regime falls, and optimistic it's possible. Certainly administration, the Israelis, a lot of countries would like it. Um, it doesn't necessarily convert to an immediate boost to at least the Iranian oil sector. It depends, I guess, on how they get their act together. I remember Ed Morris explained this to me, another common friend of ours. You know, if you look at countries in political transition or turmoil, we saw this with the Soviet Union, we saw Libya, we saw with Iraq after the 2003 war. Sometimes take countries a while to get their act together, which often impacts the oil and their oil industry. It doesn't. I mean, I guess if the regime fell, it was kind of very almost immaculate. You had a government take over right away. Maybe everything would be nice. But if there's more turmoil and a real revolution, and it's kind of maybe drawn out, I don't know if it necessarily leads to a boost, at least in Iranian oil exports. Do you?
Well, so as you know, my CEO is named Scott Modell, and he's a former CIA field officer, and he was the top expert on Iran. No one knows more about Iran than Scott Modell, my business partner and our CEO. He's very busy these days, as you can imagine. And I think as we look at it, it depends. Let's take the Soviet Union as a very interesting. Okay, initially, after the Soviet Union collapsed and Yeltsin was in, look at Russian production soared. They invited Western companies to come in, and quickly you saw a big boost in Russian production. Now, what happened? Putin came in, and okay, and now they've stagnated, and there's problems. But so I think that early Russian example, though, is hopeful if the next regime in Iran is stable. If Iran can have a stable regime aligned from the West, I think it would be much more positive than, say, Venezuela. Venezuela, even if we have perfect conditions in Venezuela, friendly governments, elections, everything's fine. That's like a manufacturing process. I mean, it's a lot of it's the biggest reserves, but it's turning gunk into oil. It's a manufacturing process of heavy oil. Iran is just conventional, good old fashioned oil and gas, like second
Yeah.
largest gas reserves or something like that. So, and it's right near infrastructure that can send it out. And so if we imagine Iran with a stable government, I mean, there's so many beautiful things that come from it from a security, economic standpoint. Russia is screwed. All of a sudden, we wouldn't be building pipelines through the Black Sea. We'd be building pipelines through out from Central Asia to bring it out through Iran, plus the Iranian supply itself. So, Mike, I think you could get like that Russia 1990s boost. Now, the question you raise is for it to continue, you have to have continued good news in Iran. You have to have stability. So it all depends on the nature of that successor regime. I'm
Okay.
pretty pessimistic about a lot of things, and Scott's the expert, but I think Iran is going to end up good. I think Iran's going to end up with a stable regime in love with Israel, in love with the United States, like its people are. They'll
Yeah.
be tough business people. They're tough. They're proud, entrepreneurial people.
Yeah.
But
Very
I think it's going to be a great story when this regime is over with. I do. I rarely get so optimistic about an idea, and I think Iran may surprise us to the upside. It's one place I allow myself to be a little optimistic. So,
No, no, I share that. I was asked, I remember being, I testified in Congress during the Arab Awakening, I guess it was 2011 or so. And I said, they asked, some congressman asked what country you're the most optimistic about. And I said, ultimately, I'm the most optimistic
yeah,
about Iran once
right.
this regime goes, because the people are very capable. They have a lot of resources. Let me ask you a few more of these things let me ask you, given what you've laid out, and I'm channeling, or I'm going to read a question of my colleague John Hanna, who you know well.
Yeah, I do.
And John asked, "Will the crisis fundamentally alter the market going forward? Could this be good for you as oil and gas producers, as well as Venezuela, which the United States now influences, if people don't want to be too dependent on a risky Strait of Hormuz?"
Okay, great question. Hello, John.
Yeah,
Let's break it up between LNG and oil. And let's assume there's no physical damage to infrastructure. Very important because so far both sides have been restrained. in limiting their energy tax, energy infrastructure tax to domestic, meaning their domestic facilities, their refineries, their fuel depots. They haven't hit export terminals, Carg Island or Ras Tanura terminal. They hit Ras Tanura refinery. Today, the Ruwais refinery in UAE is just, it does. So it's getting more serious, but they haven't hit Abqaiq, the most important, valuable piece of real estate on planet Earth. So far, they've been restrained. If we assume this crisis ends without long-term physical damage to infrastructure, and all it is turning on Hormuz, I think depending, Mike asked about, some of the fields may take a while to bring back on. You may have some delays there, but I don't think on the oil side too much changes, right? Where I can see a bigger change is on LNG. LNG is really constant, unlike oil. Oil, you got oil in Africa, you got oil in the Americas. We're the fastest growing. Argentina, Guyana, Brazil, US, Canada. With LNG, it's like three: Australia, Qatar, and the United States. And Qatar was just proven to be enormously risky. And force majeure and shutting down is going to terrify Asia. And so Qatar's position as a reliable LNG supplier is going down. I hate to say it. No, I have nothing against them. But
Right.
and investors looking at LNG are going to attach a permanent premium onto U.S. and even Australian and any other marginal, but those are the main supply centers projects. So LNG, I see a bigger structural impact. Oil, less so.
Well, we
Yeah,
see where there'll be a greater demand for U.S. and Australian LNG
absolutely.
and a premium on the from the price from the Qatari.
Right.
I see. Well, okay. Maybe that'll mean the Qataris will invest a little less money in our university and education system, but that's a separate discussion. Um, uh, a little less money for Hamas. So, anyhow, let me ask you another market. Maybe it doesn't get as much attention, but it's related about the products market. Including fertilizers and that sort of thing, that apparently have some, I think, maybe impact on other industries. I don't know if that's your area, but I just thought, like, I guess this thing could have a ripple effect on a number of, commodities, it seems like, not just oil and gas.
Yeah,
Is that right?
you're right. I'm not an expert, but sulfuric acid,
Yeah.
and then fertilizer feedstocks like
Yeah.
nitrogen is the,
Yeah.
I mean, gas is the basically food comes from fertilizer. Fertilizer comes from natural gas. Right? So
Right. That's
20% of natural gas is gone. I mean,
right. So there you go.
and food coming in. You may have food crises in the Gulf producers. That's why even when they open it up, because remember that strait is 21 miles at its narrowest. But think about it like I-95. If those of you are on the East Coast, it's like a highway with two lanes called TSS, transshipment schemes. And it's a 2 mile wide. Each highway lane is 2 miles wide, and you got to stay in that lane because it's shallow elsewhere. And so it's I-95 on a busy day, and you're going to have to worry about getting food up in there while you're wanting to get the oil out. So even when it unblocks, there's going to be congestion on I-95, if you know what I mean. And that's part of the problem with the vulnerability of the strait. It's not just 21 miles, it's those 2 mile wide lanes. And so even Iranian artillery can range, they know exactly where
Yeah.
the ships have to be. Anyway, I digress. But yeah, it's a problem for more than just oil and gas.
When the Iranians started firing and hitting drones and missiles at their neighbors, and Trump raised it, and I've talked to some experts, certainly on the Israeli side, who say, well, that was stupid, because they're forcing these countries that weren't even involved in this war to, maybe align themselves now with the United States. We'll see. I mean, talking about Qatar, uh, I mean, that they apparently reportedly they're upset at Hamas, not for October 7th, but because they haven't condemned these attacks. And supposedly, I don't know, we'll see if they actually do it, if they've asked some of these Hamas leaders to leave Qatar. On the other hand, it sounds like the picture you're painting today is a pretty negative picture on the energy sector, and it is really going to raise the costs for the United States in this war. Is that how, unless it ends very quickly, is that how you see
Well,
it?
that's right, Mike. And I don't want to end on an even gloomier note, but I think it's important, especially for achieving the goals of the war and sustaining political support for the war. And here's my concern. I'm not sure they thought through the oil market implications of this.
Hmm.
If I were still there, I would advise them to prioritize the degradation of Iran's abilities to choke oil. Because if they don't, Iran's strategy, its only way to get leverage, especially after June, is to inflict an oil price spike on Donald Trump. It's the only, I call it flashing the Glock. It's the only thing they can do to get leverage over Trump. They don't have military escalation. And for Israel, that matter. Israel won't even stop for oil, but they know if Donald Trump calls up Bibi Netanyahu and says, gasoline's at 425, the Dow's down 10%, cut it out. That's what I'm afraid of. Because I'm between us, I know we're off the record here. I think what the president's doing with Iran and Israel is courageous, principled, and correct. So this regime needs to go. I'm concerned they haven't thought through the oil side, though. And Iran is playing a game where they're like, they know, look at you have the foreign minister of Iran, Arachi, is sending out tweets with the pump price increases in major states. They know that if they can just keep oil prices high, they can impose a political cost on Trump and get him to back off. That's part of the reason they're attacking their neighbors. They have to make, and it's very different for them. There's a very different strategy because I think they feel it's as existential. They need to make it everybody's problem and Trump's problem, especially at the pump. And that is why it's so important, not only as an energy matter, but just to avoid losing this conflict and prematurely ending it, leaving an intact Iranian regime angry, embittered, and reconstituting. I wish they would just do it differently on oil. They have got to get that strait open and push back those Iranians from threatening it as a matter of like a strategy for winning the conflict.
Well, that gets another. How do we that? Um, what can we do? Let's say going forward, so we don't find, excuse me, ourselves in this position. Let's say in a few years, if you know, is it boosting? I mean, you seem not to think the SBR would have a lot of impact. And why is that exactly? If you could explain that a little more, because I recognize that Biden drew it down a lot, so that's one issue. And then I don't know, according to the Wall Street Journal, there've been some issues with the SBR and how much actually, it could put out in a given day. But would it, do you see that as not as effective as we thought? Do you think it's that it's lower, that we need to like put it back to where we were before, like 5 years ago?
Yeah,
Yeah,
but different things. It was shameful for Biden to sell down
yeah,
almost half the SPR for
right,
no good reason. But
exactly.
to be fair, Congress, both parties, even before Biden, were selling it down because they thought we didn't need it. They said, "Oh, we're shale oil. We produce all the oil in the world. We don't
Yeah.
need an SPR. Let's sell it off just to pay the visa bill."
Hmm.
That was stupid, too. Uh, After Russia, the Ukraine, at least Congress is no longer engaging in that stupidity. But you had Biden sell it off. So now it's at 60% of capacity. President Trump, to his credit, wants to refill it. We got to wait till prices go down. And that we should do. However, again, it goes back to Hormuz, going back to my initial comments about load-bearing assumptions. Hormuz is too big of a problem. I mean, even if we assume and the caverns are working well, I know there's debates and discussions. The DOE says initially it can flow just the U.S. SPR at 4.4 million barrels a day. Do I
Right,
believe that? No.
right,
What's a more reasonable number? What have we seen in history? 1 million
right.
barrels a day.
Yeah,
But let's assume optimistic case. U.S. does one, there are other countries do one. That's two. Two compared to 10 of crude that we lost and 15 and 5 of products that we lost.
yeah.
So it's just not big enough. It's Hormuz is just too big of a problem for even a functioning full SPR to solve. That's the problem with Hormuz. That's why we got to solve it. You got to close and open that thing up.
One last thing on that, because you say products, we do have product reserves here, right? At
We got
least,
rid of it. We only had a little bit up in the
and
Northeast, home heating oil and gasoline. We got rid of it. Yeah.
even the industry, what I was mean, they don't. It's marginal. It's negligible.
It was marginal. It was like
Yeah,
Rhode Island to some terminal somewhere. They got like 1 million barrels. They got rid of it. It was
I
silly.
see. So that was.
Yeah.
Would that be something, for instance, that it actually would be worth reviving? You think a
You
product
know, I
reserve?
don't think so because it's not like the industry doesn't know how much oil to hold, or let's say that the government knows better. I mean, I don't know about you, Mike. As the older I get, the more libertarian I become, and I just think the government's wisdom is less and less. And
Yeah,
so, to say we need to mandate this or mandate that suggests the government has better data analysis or information than the private sector. And my life experience tells me that's not the case.
mm,
So, I don't think mandating reserves, is the way to go, or having the government buy a bunch of oil and store it, very expensive. I'm kind of a more of a free market. I'm not sure the benefits there. Really, especially since look, from our perspective, as long as we can get enough oil, we are a producer. We have a lot of refining. For our military, we're well supplied. It's about really dampening the price effect, and that you have to have like Chinese style huge SPRs, and we're not going to be doing that.
I see.
Yeah.
All right. Well, look, I think is there anything I haven't asked you that you think is
Well, no, I mean, you had to ask me something nice. I mean, fun. I mean, I feel like I'm never going to be invited back here. I wish I had better news. No, I think we've covered everything. The good policies, the bad policies, the just the math. I think it's important for your members kind of just to understand the math problem. That's what makes these price moves so wild. It's either going
well,
to be a great story, this is going to stop and prices are going to collapse, or if it goes on, it's going to get much worse. It's just a math kind of problem, a plumbing kind of
oh,
problem.
have we seen a drop of oil prices like that, like we saw
I think it's
yesterday?
been a while. Maybe COVID, we started to see some percentage moves like that, but I think I haven't checked history, but I mean, we went almost 30% up and then pretty much 30% down. That's getting in the historic area.
It
Uh,
sounds like to me you're bullish on oil prices right now, unless
Near
you
term, I wish I wasn't. I
yeah,
wish I wasn't.
and
Um,
products.
yeah.
Sounds like the earlier you fill up your gas tank, also the better. Yeah.
I'd keep it full right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately. So
All right. Well, look, Bob, thank you so much. I really appreciate this. It's terrific talking to you, as always, seeing you, and we appreciate all our interactions with each other. And I appreciate your involvement with JINSA and everything. And I encourage everyone to go look at Bob's website at Rapidan, and if they have follow-up issues to ask Bob. So thank you so much, Bob.
thank you, Mike. Thanks to everybody and stay safe out there.
Forward
Thanks a
to
lot.
staying in
Bye bye.
touch. Thanks a lot, Bob. Thank you. Bye-bye.